So I'm here with Michelle Krusiec. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having.
And you did the short for Bite Size Halloween Nian.
Yes.
And um I'm a fan of of a lot of the cryptids and mythological creatures. And Nian I was a little bit familiar with. Um, but what I'm aware of, your version of this seemed a little different than what I'm familiar with, I guess. It seemed like with the tongue thing, it seemed more like a Mononongal kind of. It had more horrific kind of, I guess, attributes that I'm used to. I guess what's your background with Nyan, and what brought you to this story? And more importantly, what brought you to Bite Size Halloween to begin with?
Yeah. Well, the origin of my jumping off point as a writer was that my son came home from kindergarten with this Chinese story about the Nian, and he goes to a Chinese language program, and so he had to learn the story. And so when I watched it, it was about how and why Chinese New Year is celebrated the way it is, being that we make fireworks and we make loud noises and we paper our house in red. And all of it is done to keep away evil and the Nian. And the Nian is this monster that comes down and eats villagers. Now that story, I've seen that particular monster drawn mostly as a kid's animated creature. It doesn't look very scary, pretty friendly looking actually. And for Chinese horror, which is kind of non-existent because in China you have censorship laws, you can't make Chinese horror as a filmmaker, at least not legally. So you can't, it's very hard for me as a filmmaker on the Western side to really research Chinese horror. So for me, I had to really envision in this genre of delivering a more modern retelling of the Nian, how was I going to create the Nian, not in a childlike way, but more for an adult and Western audience. Given that there's also the limitation of budget, how could I also do that practically speaking? And so I chose to do it in a very theatrical way, which was in camera and using very limited visual effects. And for me, I think your last question was, how did I come to Bite Size Halloween?
Yeah, the how did they approach you, or did you have the short all ready to go, or did they come at you and it's like, oh, I'm gonna pull out this story. This seems like a good one, or that
Yes.
how did that develop?
Yeah, so Elizabeth Gelly, who is, and I hope I'm saying her last name correctly, she is from 20th Digital. She came to my graduation showcase as part of AFI Directing Workshop for Women, and she saw my short that I made in that program, and she invited me to come in and pitch for 20th Digital. So I came up with 4 ideas, I believe, and one of them was the Nian, and that's the one they gravitate towards. And for me, the idea of Nian was to not only draw upon the myth and create the idea of how to use this as an origin piece for the Nian, but it was also an opportunity for me to visually create some of the things that I'm drawn to, um, which is the idea of horror. What I like is when horror is also beautiful, like Bram Stoker's Dracula and when Francis Ford Coppola did it. To me, when horror is also beautiful in a theatrical way, that for me kind of pulls in some of my background of having come from theater and also my love for Butoh. Butoh is a Japanese dance form that I've always been drawn to. And when I thought about how I could create the Nian creature using a human, I thought about the things that scare me. And what always scares me is when it's believable and very real feeling. And so this short allowed me to pull in all those ideas.
Also, you have a lot of I wouldn't call this short funny, because it's pretty horrifying through most of it, but it is undercover funny through a lot of it. And you're no stranger to comedy. Obviously, I've seen some of your solo act. I would just call it stand up. It's a lot like a John Leguizamo's one man show,
Yeah,
similar to that. And
I do.
the mom character in this, it seems very similar to your portrayal of your own mom in your solo act.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I was kind of struggling with this moment where the granddaughter says, "What are you supposed to say when someone tells you to go back to your own country?" And originally I was, I had her throwing a rock. I had her I had her saying, "Fuck you, bitch," and nothing really landed. And I couldn't quite, and I was actually surveying my Asian friends. What do you say when someone says that to you? What do you And people would hem and haw. And felt like I was approaching it the wrong way. I was approaching it in a very intellectual way. Like, what's the right thing to say? Well, there is no right thing to say because what they're saying isn't right either. So I realized, like, well, what would my mom say? And that's when I was like, oh, well, this is what she would say. And I realized that the short is about irreverence. It's about allowing my community the permission to be irreverent and to take those moments and take the wind out of those moments, because the ability to say that to someone and to rob them of a voice is very powerful. So you have to meet that kind of behavior with its own irreverent behavior. So that was, for me, the theme throughout the whole piece was, how can I be irreverent in all of this?
Well, you said there's no right thing to say. I think her character did say the right thing. 'Cause
Oh,
as soon as she
good.
said that, I'm like, when's that t-shirt coming out? I want 3 of them.
I'm hoping for a meme. Can you help me? Can you meme
Yeah.
that, Eric?
Yeah, let's make eat my pussy racist t-shirts.
Yes.
Another kind of undercover funny, and maybe I'm looking into this too much, but there's a part where the racist girl is chasing down the main character, and she's going through the bathroom stalls, and she gets to one, and it doesn't say out of order. It says "do not use," and she opens it up, and there's a American history book textbook, probably a foot higher than it needs to be. Which growing up in America and then learning about stuff and realizing how much crap they shoveled down our throats as kids, I thought that was a great jab at that. I don't know if that was intentional. It almost had to be, but I thought that was really brilliant.
Eric, I'm going to hand it to you. The American history book was intentional, of course, but now that you mention it, I think that was an accident. The "do not use" was meant to be there, but the "do not use American history," that for me is like, oh, I wasn't actually
Because
intending for that.
it could have said out of order. It could have
That's
said
right.
broken. It could have said any number of things. It said, please do not use. I'm like, oh, that's brilliant.
That you get that. Thank you, Eric Holmes, for bringing that to life. Sometimes the universe works on your behalf without you realizing it, and I think that was one of those moments.
So, do you back to your stand-up? Do you do that a lot still, or because I mean, you're kind of a Renaissance woman, really, between the filmmaking, the stand-up. Says that you've done work for sexually abused victims and domestic violence victims. I do a little bit of everything. How do you find time for all that? And what do you have the most passion for of all that?
I think because I came up as an actor, I came up as an actor and as a writer. I wrote from a very early age. I had no childhood, so I read a lot of books. And when you come from a working class family, you can't go to any like after school programs. So I always wrote and imagined, and acting was a way for me to get some visibility in my life when I was a kid. Coming from a DV household. And, the 30 years that have passed since I began, and I started when I was 11, I've learned a few things about the world, because acting requires you to put yourself in the shoes of other people. And when it comes to stories, you have to be able to understand every facet of a story. And so, now as a director, I think I've just naturally taken on everything I've learned, because I've had to as an actor, and I always saw acting as a means of being an artist. And everything that I've thrown myself in sometimes I threw myself into things because I just needed to stave off the fact that I was unemployed and needed to keep my artistic brain working. But a lot of it oftentimes was that growing up from a DV household, you deal with a certain kind of nervous system. And when I would be on sets, if I ever came into conflict with something that was triggering, and that's usually like experiences of authority and fear of failure, because I had a very high, strong nervous system, I would always try and figure out how to work with that. And believe it or not, stand-up comedy is the best way to deal with the high nervous system, where you have high expectations on how to perform. And it really puts you in the deep water of what happens when you're on stage and you're trying to deliver material that's supposed to be funny, and your nervous system is working against you. So that's kind of why I did it as a performer, but I also did it because it just makes you a better writer when you can write your own material. So, when you put all those things into the mixed bag, that's what makes a really great director. And I think at a certain point, I was able to say, I do have something to say. I'm not just coming to directing because it's in response to any other movement that's happening in my life. I really was very deliberate about that process.
Also, let's see what her character's name is. Tammy, the racist girl in this. She's got to do some incredibly racist things in this, and I'm assuming the actor's not that person at all. But that's got to be uncomfortable for someone that's not that way to play that character. How do you do that on set? I guess the best example of something like that would be an actor in a Quentin Tarantino movie that's doing something like that. It's like, oh, I don't. I mean, I read the script, I knew what time it was, but this is really tough. How do you approach that when shooting it?
Yeah, it's a great directing question, because I did come up with I did have an experience with a previous actor who, when it came time to do some hard work, I think there was my realization when I looked into her eyes that there was a lot of fear, and that she wanted to do the work, but could not do the work. Because there has to be a willingness to really be ugly when you're an actor, just show parts of humanity that aren't acceptable and socially tolerable. And with Ava, the minute I saw any hesitation, I was sure to get in a conversation with her and just ask her, because she is not this character at all. And because she's not this character, I was a little bit concerned that maybe it would be very hard for her, that maybe she willingly wanted to do it, but emotionally couldn't handle it. So I was very, very certain to have private conversations with her, even after she was cast, to say, hey, listen, I understand what you're taking on. It is completely okay for you to tell me that this is not right for you. And so we kept tabs on that conversation. And she was very much, candid with me and saying that she was willing to do it and wasn't afraid. And she was really behind the meaningfulness of what the story was trying to tell, and that she could play her part in order to execute that full vision.
Yeah. And again, there's so much the workshop you do, and all the uh you know um victim relief and stuff that you work on. Oh, God, we could go on for this forever. We only got so much time. I guess I'll just go with the simple one. It looks like you got another short coming out called Bite.
Yes, Bite is the short that 20th Digital saw originally, that prompted them to invite me to pitch. So that one is just starting its festival circuit. It was released, we just finished it this past March. So I've gotten definitely rejection letters. So I'm waiting for my festival acceptance letter. But it's the kind of movie that also has to find its niche. And so I'm really grateful that I went from one project right into Nian. And for Bite, it's just entering the festival circuit now.
Yeah. What's the story with that? Like, where how do you approach that differently than you approach Nian?
Well, Nian is definitely a horror, and Bite kind of fell between a drama and a bit of a psychological thriller. So I think because it falls a little bit in an in-between category, it has to find its right audience. I think I intended it to be more of a straight drama, but I think it ended up being a little bit more of a psychological thriller, which is kind of, just me in the edit room trying to figure out, what the footage I have. We shot during the pandemic, and it was a really tough shoot. But I'm always very ambitious with what I'm trying to create. And I think for me now, in hindsight, with a short like that, you have to know, just because I'm also new to the festival circuit as a director, you also have to know what festivals are right and where to submit it, because not every festival is right for something like that. So I feel like that one is trying to find its home. And I think with Nian, it's I very clearly set out to make a horror.
Yeah. And also, is there with your solo show, I've seen bits and pieces of it on YouTube. Is the entire thing available anywhere?
It isn't. So whenever someone tells me they've seen it, I'm always like, where? Because it is not available. There's always been an intention of mine to return to it, to make it into a feature. So for me, releasing the material online has always been, I've always been a little bit torn as to, how much I should release. But at the moment, it still exists mostly as a stage piece. And at some point in my directing career, I think I will adapt it.
Yeah.
But definitely, as you've recognized, I'm still sourcing, those characters into my work today.
Yeah. When you do that, and I'll end on this, when you do that, do you memorize that word for word, or do you kind of have the broad strokes, and kind of is there a lot of jazz when you're on stage where you're kind of coming up with it on the spot in a certain manner of speaking, I suppose?
For me, for the solo show, it's been written. The jazz is more how I work with the audience in terms of rhythms and timing. But in terms of, when I'm writing something that's more of a stand-up, I think that's where I do more jazz. But for a solo show, it's definitely more of a scripted material.
Yeah. Well, Michelle, thank you for coming on. And this was, look, all these shorts on this bite-sized Halloween thing they've all been bangers so far, and this one's no different. And congratulations on it. And I look forward to seeing what else you got in the future. Hopefully more stand-up. Hopefully more stand-up.
I would love to. I would love to. Yeah, I mean, I definitely have some material about giving birth that is pretty. I did some stand-up about giving birth, and I think the women in the front row who were in their 20s were so horrified by my material. But I guess that just means that, I really love, maybe I'm just meant for dark horror comedies.
Yeah, ain't nothing wrong with that. Dark horror comedies are great.
Right. Thanks, Eric.
All right, thank you, Michelle.